Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. We're in the studio today, and we're going to be talking about what the world is talking about, and that is the Tyre Nichols situation that's taking place down in Memphis. I think there's a lot to really talk about. And so we're going to break that apart and kind of give our own opinion, our expert, non-expert opinion on the issues at hand. But before we do that, on last week, we had Dr. Pashik from SVSU in the house. And he followed up with some additional information for resources for those of you who are thinking that maybe there's a need to speak with someone. So, Jonathan, you received the email. We're going to allow you to give that update.
Yeah, I just thought that it would be good to give this update because we asked him if somebody needed help, where could they go? What would be a good first step? And he followed up with us that the APA, that's the American Psychological Association, psychologist locator is at locator.apa.org. For anybody that wants to find some help that way. It shows search by location, speciality, and topic, and other provider characteristics. And then there's also a couple crisis lines, the 988 lifeline, the suicide hotline, obviously in very dire situations. There's a text-based one, www.crisistextline.org. And lastly, he says that for lots of people, the main limiting factor is affordability. So for them, I'd encourage them to simply call the number on the back of their insurance card and ask the agent for a therapist or a psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker, or counselor, or whatever, who is within their network. There are many providers out there who function under the broad umbrella of therapist, but who don't actually have any license or certification, e.g. coaches. So it can be good to narrow things down a little bit. So,
okay, now was that did you say the suicide line?
988?
Yeah.
The suicide hotline.
Okay.
Is there. Yep.
All right, awesome. So we certainly thank him, Dr. Pashik. We're going to bring him in. I really liked his vibe. He was on top of it, and not just because he sided with me on some of my thoughts and opinions.
And thought you were a narcissist. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you know, after the show, this is so funny. If you weren't here last week or you didn't listen to last week's show, we were talking, and as we were just kind of seeing where we were. I think I asked the question about how are you, and so I kind of like, hey, he asked me like, how am I? And I was like, I kind of like me. I like hanging out with me. I kind of like, and he goes, yeah, that's narcissistic behavior. And I was like,
he's talking about healthy narcissism.
Yeah.
There's a narcissist, and then narcissism.
And so everyone, we heard what we wanted to hear. It was funny in the moment, but healthy narcissism. So it's good to be okay with oneself. That's what he was trying to say, and my cohorts here are agreeing. You hear, and like, bring Mark in. He's already talking, so I mean, there's really no need for an introduction. We have Mark Bassett with us here, my co-host, and then also John B. in the place to be is on the other side.
Hello.
We were waiting for the hello. But I want us to get into today's conversation. We got a lot to talk about as we discuss the issues with Tyre Nichols. In my head, I keep saying Tyre Irving. Am I saying Tyre Nichols?
Yes, you are.
Okay, because in my head, I keep thinking that I'm saying Tyre Irving, and I don't know why.
Mixing up Kyrie Irving and
that's probably what it is. All us black men with all these names, it gets confusing sometimes. But I do want to start out just by, first of all, I was watching and saw that now President Biden's Rehoboth
Beach House.
Yeah, his beach house. First of all, I'm tripping. Like, how many houses do these guys have?
They're worth a lot of money. Some of these guys.
Oh my! Yeah. I mean, we're seeing that you can't be poor and be the president. But they're now searching this house, and I think this is really kind of crazy that we're finding all of these classified documents scattered in various places all over the country. But many people don't understand why this is important. So Mark, you being the senior guy and understanding all of this so well, why do you share with it? Why does it this is such an important topic?
There could be confidential, there are, in the documents they're worried about, there is confidential information which if it fell into the wrong hands could be used in a lot of very bad ways for self-gain or to the detriment of the country. And so that's why, and you see the same thing in business, where it's business classified. You're supposed to handle it especially certain ways. My guess is, given what we've seen so far, is if you started looking at everybody, you'd start probably finding everybody's got documents.
They didn't let President Obama take no documents. They was like, you can leave, but leave your documents here.
My guess is there's probably documents he shouldn't have as well.
Well, I want to know. I want to know. Let's see. Let's see.
I think to me, the bigger it's interesting for me. And Jonathan and I were talking. I got here early about it. It was like,
notice the two white guys are always here early, waiting for the black man. Well, I slide in the whole place. Go ahead.
Anyway, it's like when I left a job, I took nothing with me because it was like, I don't need this anymore. Why do I want to carry these files with me?
Did they take your computer?
They take my computer, of course. Yeah. When I left a company, they took my computer.
Right.
But within a company, I might switch jobs.
Yeah.
And I never took files from one job to the next. I always just left it behind. And so I don't know why these guys are taking files. Like, you're a retired president. Why you need to take any files from when you're president with you? You're done. Move on. Why do you want the files? So I don't understand. But
I said that the nuclear launch codes make good bookmarks.
They
so.
But I think it's important. I think that it's just the natural thing. Think about there are things that you pick up and you have with you. Maybe you're reading through them. And I know that there have been several. I've been at like libraries. I went to the Southfield Library. I almost went to prison. I almost went to jail. I was at the Southfield Library and I came in and I had my binder and I had a backpack and all this other stuff. And there were books all over the place and documents that we had. And we were cleaning up and I thought I literally left everything there. And walked out and my bag started. I'm like, what's going on?
Stealing books.
I'm like, I ain't got nothing. And then made me come back and I got, things that were not even supposed to be leaving the library in my backpack. I'm like, that was not supposed to be in there. So I can kind of understand how if you're using something and you're, looking at maybe having a meeting.
Yeah, my guess is like the president.
Can't they have these documents?
They're not actually packing up their boxes. Someone else is packing.
There are assistants that are doing these things.
And so, and this is kind of where when one side starts to make fun of somebody else, be careful what you do, because now Joe Biden, the Democrats are going after Trump for taking all these classified documents, and lo and behold, Biden's got them as well.
I think
my guess is if you went back, they probably all have them.
Mike Pence got them.
Yeah,
the only person who doesn't have them is President Barack Obama. Watch, I guarantee you. We know as black men, when we went to the store as little kids, we were taught, don't touch nothing when you go in there. So he doesn't have any documents. I'm just joking. But this is definitely, I think Mike Pence is the one who said, and I like the way he's been handling his stuff. He's like, hey, I shouldn't have him. It's wrong. We are all wrong if you find him in our place. He goes, but this speaks to a greater breakdown in how we're protected. Absolutely. And I think that's where this should be. Let's not make it partisan. Let's make it about the issue that's there. I love the fact that he took ownership, and that's huge with me. So I hope we continue to move past that. The next thing that I want to do, this is the first. This is technically February 1st. You'll hear this on February 5th. But one thing that I like to do every single time, we only get 28 days, so I got to maximize this moment.
Quick question. Have you been in Target lately?
No, I have not.
They've got a whole kind of Black Pride section in the clothes section right in the front, which is kind of cool.
Like, what do you mean Black Pride?
Yeah, it's Black
like
history,
James Brown,
like the Black Power fist on a T-shirt. And,
really?
Yes, you should check it out. I was fairly impressed. It was pretty cool. Some of the
I'm gonna have to swing.
I'm not sure I could pull off wearing it, but
Mark, you are the only person in Midland or like surrounding areas who has Black protest art as a part of your decor in your home. So you might be able to pull it off, Mark. But so I'm going to take a look at that. But I do want to give a spotlight in Black history. Many of you that are out there, there's so many things, and I'm not going to read everything that I sent you guys, but I do want to give some highlights. And I want to talk about something, Mark. We had a conversation that when I was talking about Dr. Latimer, Lewis Howard Latimer is who we're going to be talking about on the spotlight in Black history. And he was an inventor. He was an African-American inventor who his greatest history, and I remember growing up as a kid, was that he was the one who perfected the filament. And the filament is the piece that goes inside of a light bulb to make it work. We all know that Mr. Edison was the one who created the light bulb. But without the light bulb, without the filament, you really don't have a light bulb. But that wasn't the only thing that I wanted to share about his contribution, or his life, more so his life. Lewis Howard Latimer. I'll just read some of this for you guys, for those who don't know. From September 1848 to December 11th, 1928, was an African-American inventor and patent draftsman, which is a huge thing for a black man to be. There are a lot of patents that, slaves created, but because slaves couldn't own property, couldn't own land, and could not hold the patent, a lot of those patents were then owned by other white slave owners. But he was a draftsman. His inventions included an evaporative air conditioner, an improved process for manufacturing the carbon filaments, hence for the light bulbs, an improved toilet system.
Very important.
For railroad cars. Have you guys ever taken the railroad, a rail train?
Yep.
Not in the U.S. I don't. Now that I'm thinking about it, Europe.
In
Europe and Asia, I have.
That's the only time I have was when I was in Europe. You have in the U.S.
Yeah,
Amtrak.
When I was very young, we took the train from Fort Wayne, Indiana to Buffalo, New York.
Wow.
Several times.
Amtrak.
I have no
Probably,
idea. I was very young.
Well, once the weather breaks, I've made a commitment. I got a couple of friends. We're going to go spend the day in Chicago. We're going to take the train as a scenic route. I know that a couple of them have done it. They said it's really a good time. So bring a good book, 4 or 5 hours, which is what it would take if you were to drive there. You can be there and just kind of relax and see some beautiful sights on the side of the mountains or the hills or whatever it is that we have between Michigan and Chicago.
I don't think there are any, are there?
Ripples in the landscape. Okay, Mark.
Okay. All right, you're going to go through beautiful Gary, Indiana.
Back to Mr. Lattimore. Well, anyways, he improved the toilet system for railroad cars. That's where we got sidetracked right there. In 1884, he joined the Edison Electric Company. That's Thomas Edison Electric Company, where he worked as a draftsman and wrote his first book on electric lighting. How interesting. What great writing and reading. The Lewis H. Lattimore House is landmark former residence, is located near Latimer Projects. Now, this is the part that I want to...
Queens.
And Queens, not like in Coming to America, but Queens, New York.
Yep.
There was a part... I wanted to read this. When they were trying to figure out how do you get free, and this was something that was interesting. And I read about this one other place. That last paragraph that I gave you, It says when Lattimore was 10, his mother decided to split the family. The idea, the concept of splitting the family. After the Dred Scott case ruled individual slaves needed to prove that they had consent of their owners in order to legally become free. Many slaves at the time, such as Latimer, had lived free by escaping into free states and becoming citizens who often would not be sent back to their owners if apprehended by interstate slave catchers. This is crazy. But anyways, this caused Lewis's father, George Latimer, to flee from his family's safety because he had nothing to prove that he was free from enslavement. So he fled in order to protect his family. And his family ended up being somewhere in that great northwest of the country. Eventually mother, children, and things coming back together. But the idea, that the piece that I was going to talk about, or that I wanted to highlight, was that concept of splitting the family. This was not something that we hear a lot about in our history. But in order, after the Dred Scott case come out, you have to prove your citizenship, that you have the right to be free, and the permission from your owner. It was something that began to happen. And so as we often talk about how families are dissolved and diluted, that was just another thing that caught my eye, because we had some conversations about degrading dynamics of families in communities of color. And this was another instance in which families were not forcibly, but they made the split because some could provide documentations and others could not. And I just thought it was interesting. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in for this little known Black History fact, being the first day of February. And so we're going to continue to share these little known facts, or maybe facts that maybe you knew about, and we'll give you some interesting twists to those things. I've been looking at some stuff and been really excited about some of the things that I've been finding. Thank you guys for listening to that. Now we're going to transition, because I want us to we often have a tendency to go on tangents And there is a lot to talk about in this next portion as we turn to talk about the issue with Tyree. There it is. I knew in my head that I kept saying Tyree Irving, but I actually wrote it. Tyree Nichols, and he is the young man that was recently murdered at the hands of Memphis police officers. And so we're going to get into this. First of all, let's just kind of talk. We had this as a part of our hot off the press issues on last week. It was one of the things that we talked about. And we didn't really know the case. So I wanted to tread light on last week because we really didn't. It was just coming out information. Now, unless you've been under a rock, there's been a lot that's been said. It is in the circuits, all of the media circuits. And we're now seeing today, as of today, February 1st, families of murdered sons. And so we're talking about Trayvon Martin's mom. We're talking about George Floyd's mom. We're talking just about a lot of the other young men. They're all gathering in support of Miss Nichols and the loss of her son, which I think is really, it's a fraternity that no mother wants to be a part of. But I think that it is very symbolic of some things that need to be addressed. First of all, just off cuff, before we really get into a organized conversation, what are the things that you have been kind of like highlights for you guys, or things that really have stood out, or things that you're hearing, or your initial thoughts concerning this issue with Mr. Nichols?
Well, I guess I'll start. I mean, again, I think the thing that's different, I think the obvious difference here is you're talking about basically five. Historically, the ones that have gotten a lot of press are white officers really hurting or, killing in essence, or severely beating a black person. This is a case where it's black officers attacking another black male. And it kind of gets back to the question around, I think, that we've talked about before around cultures in police departments. And Jonathan and I, again, were talking a little bit before the show around.
Y'all were talking before the black man walked in the room. What were y'all talking about?
Yeah, I think the fundamental question in my mind is like, these officers, this case, pick any of these cases, of like when they're brand new as a rookie, are they doing this kind of thing? And my guess is they're largely not. And then how do you go from, being a standard police officer to being a part of five guys that beat someone to death, and people are standing around? How does that transition happen? How does that evolve? And what is the culture, and what is the environment? And because to me, that's the root of all of this. It's
Okay.
like, what is the culture of police departments where these people can evolve this way, and this can transpire, and there's people literally watching and not jumping in to stop them. And to me, that's still the biggest question and concern.
Okay. What about you, Jonathan?
I think that one of the biggest things is, it's exactly what Mark said, where just the extreme nature of the situation. I think that it's important to look in at the background of this and the whole Scorpion unit thing and the tactics that they were told to utilize, they were utilizing, all of that above and beyond what normal police usually would. And I think that use of force is something that's really going to be examined in the aftermath of this. I think that's something else that was very clearly stated from the outset by the family of Tyree Nichols is no violence. We're not going to go burn things down. We're not going to go riot. This is not. And as far as I've seen, there have been a couple instances. I was just looking just to double check on this hypothesis of mine, but it seems like it stayed fairly.
What was your hypothesis?
Well, it worked. It stayed fairly peaceful this time around.
The question in my mind, again, I don't want to be cynical about it, but is it because of their statement, or is it because this time it was black police officers attacking a black guy?
And I think the response has been somewhat muted as a result of that.
Right.
But I think that
so do y'all really think that they didn't get mad? Because I think that it has more to do with the response than the fact that they were black officers or white officers.
Okay.
And I think that what has been lacking in so many other cases is the fact my particular thought. I'm going to let you go ahead. I won't forget what I'm going to say. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. That's pretty much what I take away from it, and I think that real conversations need to come out of it about, okay, what are policing procedures now? What should they look like? I think that the conception or the perception that police are out hunting young black men is beginning to fracture. I think that's starting to go away somewhat. It may not be. That may just be my perception of it.
What gives you that perception?
That it's going away?
Yeah, where do you draw that perception
Well,
from?
I think that idea largely came from the idea of white police killing a young black man. I think that that's where that came from, and I think that this instance is going to make it. I hate the well, what about this time response where you hold up one example.
I mean, we're gonna have real conversations. Come on, that conversation is being had all over America.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and one thing that I don't want us, what I want us to not do in this space is to not be honest about the conversations that we know are being happened. So what you're just saying, that's definitely something someone's talking about. So we'll talk about it. Let's address it. But go ahead. We'll let you finish.
Well, that's pretty much it. I don't want this to become the time that people use as an argument of, well, it's all white people killing black people. Well, what about this one instance? Okay, I think that it's I am not a defund the police guy, but I think that we really do need to look at some of the legal mechanisms that are there.
Absolutely.
That police stand on top of every single day.
The other thing I just want to add here, I mean, this is clearly a horrible thing. These guys killed this guy. They're going to go to prison, and there have been other cases just like that. The average, but being a policeman is a really tough job, and you're put in dangerous situations frequently. And on the other hand, you've got communities going, hey, we're not tough enough on crime. Like this particular neighborhood, there was all sorts of issues. And so it's just a really tightrope. Police departments are walking of like, how do you balance? We can't just let anything happen to this extreme, which is just horrific and clearly wrong.
Okay. So let's talk about that, because you guys have raised a couple of issues that I think that are really important. And I think they are worthy of a real conversation. And I would love to see someone, and maybe this is where we step in and we organize something where we get, white police officers and black police officers and a diverse, or a congregation of people, grouping of people together to have a real conversation, because there's a couple of things that were different here. My firm belief is that a tantrum, not a tantrum, but riots are tantrums of the soul. I always say that when a person feels as though they have not been heard, that they're being overlooked and they are being abused and there's no way out, we respond with violence and smashing. It's what a kid does. When a kid doesn't, parents aren't paying attention, he kicks and screams, he has a tantrum. And so I tend to believe in many ways that a riot is a tantrum of the soul. And so when we look at one of the differences, and we'll talk about this, one of the things I think that is going to be so very important as to why there was no real violence as the outcry. One was because I think people honor families' comments and their words after these types of things, because they're the ones that are most impacted. But also, I think that there was swift justice in terms of how police officers, the chief handled this, or the individuals handled this, and these officers were fired immediately.
I agree. Totally agree with that.
Which is typically
very quick action.
Which is something typically that we don't see in these cases. In the Chauvin case, the George Floyd cases, all of the other cases, Trayvon Martin, and the ones that have been through this entire, Breonna Taylor, say her name. That is not usually the case. We'll talk about how that difference impacts how people respond in terms of violence as soon as we come back with more United Shades of Gray.
You're listening to United Shades of Gray on WSGW.
This is Kareem. We're back with more United Shades of Gray, conversations of race in America. We are talking here with my co-host Mark Bassett and station producer, show producer John B. in the place to be, and we're talking about Tyree Nichols and policing, actually. And before the break, we were having the conversation. I brought up the fact that one of the reasons I believe that there has been little to no incident in response to this is because for the first time that I can remember, there was a swift response from the powers that be, and the officers that were involved were immediately fired. I mean, it seems like
within a day. Within
a day.
24
As
hours.
soon as we heard about it, they were fired.
Yep.
And so, they were asking, I was watching them do an interview with the police chief, and she was saying that Cyrillin Davis, I think is what her name is. I don't think it's Carolyn. I think it's Cyrillin Davis. And she was saying, hey, she saw this. She thought it was heinous. She responded immediately. And so she showed how in these types of situations, she believed that action should be taken. So I think that that's one of the reasons there was no violence. And Mark, you were saying,
well, yeah, I 100% agree that certainly helps quell the emotion. What I was saying during break was I personally don't believe like some average citizen, whether it's in Memphis or some other city, is going to go, oh, the parents prefer us to be nonviolent. That really would stop them from venting. I do think, though, that the police chief taking very decisive and quick action probably played a major role.
And so one of the things, and this is where I think that we get it wrong. What happens in the Black community is that when we see all of these individuals, and it's been a litany of young Black men and Black women, Hispanic men and women, but Black men tend to be the targets in these situations. When we see those things, we see our sons, we see our daughters, we see our children. And I'll tell you, after the George Floyd situation, I got a call from one of my friends, and he was like, bro, I don't even know what's going on. This is a white friend of mine. He was like, bro, I don't even know what to say. I just want you to know I'm praying for you. I'm here for you, whatever. And as we talked later, he was like, man, I can't imagine what you must be feeling. And he just like, this is like, your mom must be thinking like this could be my son's. And I think that one of the reasons why it was important for that mother to speak out and her voice was so well received was because many of us in our community, we see our sons, we see our brothers, we see our children. And so for a mom who has just gone through this horrific thing, we honor that, because one of the reasons we're protesting, or they're yelling, not we're, but they protested, they're yelling, is because they feel the pain. They see the pain of that mother and they want it to end. And so I think it's one of the reasons why. But I want to talk about a couple of things that I think are really interesting. First of all, I applaud, and I feel crazy about having this conversation, but I know that this is if we're going to have real conversations, we have to have real conversations, right? I applaud the fact of what this police chief did in firing these men right away, because what they did. Did you guys watch the videos by chance?
I refused. I don't need to see that.
Did you see them?
Yeah, I did.
What was your thought when you saw the videos? I mean, because I didn't think that they were gory, but they were just kind of like to see officers of the law carry out that way, where it was just kind of.
Yeah, it definitely leaves a bad taste in my mouth. There's a certain amount of, when you drive by the cops, oh, it's the cops, or you pass one in the street, it's like, oh, okay, well, let's make sure that but it's like that. Those are the people that are meant to be protecting you, and it doesn't feel good. That's for sure.
Well,
it's like, back to my question, like, how did they get there? Were they there as a rookie police officer? Were they in that space, or did something happen over the last, I don't know how long they've been police officers, but how did they get to that spot where they felt like that's okay?
And I absolutely understand that it is not all, it is not the vast majority of police officers that have that kind of violence in their heart, I guess is the best way to put it.
I don't think that these guys are very much different than a lot of other officers. And listen, and I'm not a defund the police person, but I think that there is a culture that exists. And the other thing is, these officers were fairly new. I mean, they're not like long-term officers as what we have seen, career officers, training officers, and such and the like. But these were fairly new. So somewhere in this process, they seem to think that they had superpowers. It was Dr. Pashik, and this was something he talked about last week. He says, whenever you're in a special unit, as they were in the Scorpion unit here, and you're given certain special powers and you're given a special task, that 9 times out of 10, those powers are abused. And so I'm glad to see that one of the first things that they did was that they disbanded the Scorpion unit. But I think that if we were to take a step back and we were to look at policing as a whole, when you become a police, you become a part of a special fraternity of men and women who are given, that badge has a lot of power. And if you have never had authority in your life before, if you've ever been victimized or bullied, I think all of those things play a part psychologically in how you view yourself. But then you also have to think, why are so many people interested? Who are these people that want to be officers? And I think there's a psychological evaluation, and I'm not sure how much of that they do. I know they do it with the FBI. That needs to be a part of this process. In terms
I think the FBI has a lot easier time getting people than local police stations.
Well, I mean,
I mean,
they probably have like hundreds of people, thousands of people that want to be that cannot be or that are cut, are cut short of the entire process.
Yeah, well, my son actually had a job offer from the FBI, so I know the rigorous.
They're checking everything.
They're doing
your mama, your cousin, your play cousin.
Super deep security checks. And they're not doing that at pick your local town.
So that was one thing. So one of the things that I like, and this is, when I hear people, and I know that one of the conversations is happening. We were talking about this, Jonathan. Well, this is different. These were 5 Black officers, but I will have our listeners understand. And there's something that was just so not. I don't want to get into our Twitter feeds and the alleged things that are part of this conversation. We'll see if that happens, as that pans out. But one of the things that I think is so very important, during slavery, there were folks that were Black that carried out the agendas of white America. That's how a lot of folks.
Django Unchained.
I mean, that movie made me so mad. But that's a perfect example. And I say this, and I know that whenever I say this term, people are thrown off, but I can't think of another way. And if so, give me it, and I'll use it in the future. But white supremacy is not just something that is defined to white America, and it's not about necessarily. It's an ideology that exists, and every white person does not actively, I'm going to be a white. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a system of governance that even Black folks buy into. When I listen to some of them brothers that's on the other side, the far right side of the Republican Party, and the issues that they have, and these are some of the things when we talk.
It's a race issue, though, or they're a disgruntled against their perception that certain parts of the population are, crime, etc., that we're too soft on crime, or
I think
irrespective of race.
No. But my thought is that just because you are Black does not mean you historically hold the values and see things from that same perspective. Now, in this particular situation, this seems to be a bit more personal, and my question always comes back to what was the reason for the initial stop? And so when we look at this particular situation, it was supposed to be a reckless driving, which, I mean, don't you usually catch that on like some of the cams? Because these guys got caught on a community cam. It wasn't.
Well, a cruiser usually has a cam that's, if they're following a reckless driver, they usually have a cam unless it's been called. And even then, you still catch up to the guy, and they usually have footage of like, okay, this guy's driving
and we don't have that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I thought was, okay, so this is happening. Why are they pulling this guy over again? And this is just policing in general. And I think that this is one of the issues why, when I talk about, it's not about Black or white, but it is about the system and the culture of policing. It's talking about what does a criminal look like? What are the usual suspects or the things that we need to look at? And I think that those issues need to be addressed because, this man being pulled over, not having had any issues that have been defined by the police officers. There's usually like, oh, well, he did this. We don't even hear this coming out of this. There's no video footage of him doing what he did. So what was the original reason for engagement? And when I saw that, I looked at the videos. I was like, wait a minute. We got 5 black officers that were fired, but there was a white officer that did the initial tasing. Like, why was he not also fired in this process? And so
You'll
later,
have to ask the police chief.
I mean, no. And so go ahead.
Well, I would think I've done as a hobby, not as a hobby, but in my in free time, like watching police breakdowns and seeing how police interact with the public is interesting. And I think that comes down to, I would hypothesize that comes down to use of force guidelines. Is okay. At that time, something was happening where a taser is deemed a possibly appropriate level of force to meet that circumstance. Now, handcuffing someone and relentlessly beating them is not an excessive use, or is not acceptable use of force.
If the reason that you initially engage me is bogus, then everything that happens from that point is bogus.
Police only have to suspect
no,
that
no,
you're
no,
doing
no,
something wrong.
No. They have to have a reasonable suspicion.
But the chief must have. Again, I mean, we're lauding this police chief for firing these guys.
No, and I like
so
that.
I trust her. I would trust her judgment that she's doing the appropriate thing.
And I don't disagree. And I don't disagree, but I cannot look at the disparities. I mean, and just ignore the disparities because these are part of the conversations that are taking place. And
well, I understand, but in this case, I would go like the same person is making the decision.
No,
I find it hard to believe that she would make a great decision here and a horrible decision.
Well, no, because now this individual has been quote unquote relieved of their duties. My problem with the culture of policing doesn't always end in the aftermath, but it is also, why are there so many engagements to begin with people of color? Why are black men 2 to 3 times more likely to be pulled over by police officers than white men are? And this is an issue about the culture of policing, not just whether these are white cops or bad cops or good cops or not all bad. That's not the situation. It's an issue of that we have to really look at this culture of policing. Yes.
Well, and in a similar vein to your point about having a power and 9 out of 10 times it gets exceeded, it gets abused.
Absolutely.
Is if you have the power to, if I think someone's doing something wrong, I can detain them for a certain amount of time and learn more. Yep. Well, if I have that reasonable cause, how hard is it to bridge that, to step over that line of I can just detain someone?
But I think officers have a lot of officers, and I think that this is more pervasive than we are willing to say. And this is coming from somebody who has a family of officers in the family, paramilitary. And so I'm not even a defund the police person. So don't even try to peg that one, because that is not me. And I've said that from day one. However, I think that there is a real issue. And I think that police officers think that when I say something, you're going to do it. I had a recent encounter, which I said, you know what, I'm not even going to trip on you. I'm going to give you your 5 minutes of fame, and I'm going to handle this a different way. So this young man, the issue that I have is that the nation was rocked because George Floyd and his situation was caught on camera. The only thing that changed our conversations and people feeling bad, because black people have been saying that these things have been happening forever, and given all kinds of reasons as to why they exist. The only thing that changed with the George Floyd thing is that there was a pandemic that kept everyone at home, and no one had anything to do but watch TV, and it was recorded on video by a 17-year-old girl, and that was the reason why people could finally say, "Oh, this was wrong." But this is something that has been pervasive, that black folks have been shouting from the rooftops for a long time, that this is what we have been dealing with for a long time. And ever since then, the world was upset, but no real policy changes as it relates to policing has changed since George Floyd.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, maybe I don't know.
No, you look at it, no major changes, and our politicians will even let you know that have been changed, for law enforcement.
Yep.
maybe not on the federal level, but certainly on the state and local level, there have been significant changes. They've been drastic defunding or drastic changes put in and then walked back gradually. And there are some shifts.
Defunding of what?
Police.
Certain cities.
No.
In certain
During,
cities.
if you go back and you look at, even with these federal dollars that took place, these monies that were released, whether it be ARPA, those kinds of things, even here in the city of Saginaw, monies went to policing. These were monies for people who have been underserved, and monies went to policing officers. And for funds were, as they were talking about it, and I don't have an issue. I don't have an issue with, because like I say all the time, when something happens, I don't want, the community brigade to come out to my house. I want to have a police officer come up, show up, and to be able to protect and serve. But what I'm also saying is that when these issues are arising continually, there is not another system on the planet, if there were this many interactions, this many murders, these many happen, that we would not do real investigation on what's taking place, and not by state level, but on an international basis. And I think that there are some great things, like here in the Saginaw community, there's an organization called Bridge the Gap, which are doing things to get officers and people of color, but it's not enough to just put black faces. Has to be a changing of the culture of why policing it was created. And one of the reasons is that the historic nature of policing, going back to police black folks who are doing wrong, is what was the creation of it in the very first place. And a lot of those elements, in my perspective, yet exist and need to be addressed, is what I'm saying. Okay, so when I look at this, so I had to throw out there about that because because I'll tell you this, one of the things that I often say is that black people are a lot sooner to correct black people in these types of situations like the chief did than I often feel that white people are. I think white people give white people the benefit of doubt, and black people tend to be like, we got to do this because everybody's looking, and so I have to, I got to fire these officers because the world is looking. And other people like, no, they're innocent until proven guilty, and they'll stay and they'll be on administrative leave like Derek Chauvin was, but not fired. Now, I'm glad that she took the right, and I'm going to applaud her. And I know it sounds crazy, Mark, because I'm going back and forth on this, but I do want to say I'm glad she took the right measure of action, which I want to see across the board. The next time this happens, I want to see the same measure, no matter what color the officers are, because these officers obviously don't have the right, or haven't earned the right to wear the badge. Okay. But I just see that as a place in which we have to begin to have some consistency. And so when we talk about how things happen, we talk about all of the issues with the no-knock warrants. We talk about what was the issue of I was going to say clemency, not clemency,
qualified
immunity for officers. All of these things, these are things that I think need to be addressed both on a federal level, and that really challenge states to take a look at how we are viewing policing. What do you guys think? Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I hear what you're saying, and I agree.
Right.
I always try to look at it from the other side of, well, why does a no-knock warrant exist?
Right.
And I understand why I know, because if you're going into arrest a violent criminal, the last thing I want to do is, hey, knock, knock, knock. Hey, we're here. We're going to come get, and so I understand why they exist. And that's kind of where I go, like, the vast majority of police officers are, I think, trying to do a good job. They're good people. They're doing, in many cases, a very dangerous job dealing with violent people. And it's a really thin tightrope, kind of a razor's edge of trying to balance all of this stuff oftentimes.
Now I think that it's worth noting in this particular case. And one thing I'm gonna tell you, I want to look at every situation. I just want to throw it all on the table and we'll make sense of the quagmire. I think that it's important to also note that these men that were assembled here, that were a part of this Scorpion unit,
that this police chief assembled, I believe.
Yeah, this police chief has assembled.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to understand that Memphis had been going through some serious issues. And so this is,
and it was in this neighborhood.
Sometimes, you throw everything at the wall to see what sticks.
Yep.
And so I think that that's what this is now, allegedly. And this is where we started talking about the other issues, because this particular situation does take on a tone of personal investment. I couldn't understand. Okay, how do we get to this place where there's no real footage of a full, even on their body cams, they see the officer being pulled over, but there's no real issue of what led us to this place as other issues have. And so it looked like it escalated really fast. And allegedly there are some other things that are out there, and we'll allow the blogs and social media to really play out. And if there's any real truth to what's happening, that there is a real personal element for one of the officers that was involved.
Then it becomes just even worse, because then it's premeditated.
But then it becomes it's premeditated. Hey, I happened to see you, and maybe it wasn't. Maybe I pulled. Hey, that's the guy.
Yeah.
He's dating my girl.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is a sense of a good old boys network, and I say that about police officers and I've been there. Now I tell you, family members who are police officers. You don't mess with the fraternity of officers.
I mean, they've got each other's lives in their hand. I mean, so I get it.
So I got
it's
your
like
back.
The military in a sense.
And so if that is the case, and that's what we're seeing, I think that we have a really long way to go, because there is no way to really take away personal issues. And then once again, in the words of Dr. Pashik, that whenever you give special powers and put a special designation on any group of individuals, they are more than likely going to abuse it. Because we as people, we get drunk with power, and I always tell people that the best type of leadership is not positional leadership, but it's leadership by influence.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I do think, again, these are all, and I don't want to diminish anything here.
Absolutely.
All horrible incidents, but I'm also a realist. And so like when you have, and I don't know how many police interactions there are with the public in a year, there've got to be millions of them. I don't care how good
question. I wonder how many there actually are.
Yeah. You'll never end up in a system where there are zero excessive force, and so it'd be interesting to me of just, what are the statistics? Are we talking about fractions of 0.01%, and again, that's, I don't want to go about and diminish any one of these because they're horrible. But I'm also, again, an engineer at heart, and I tend to want to look at statistics and go, because the last thing I want to do is take individual incidences that are super rare and make broad generalizations from them.
Absolutely.
So
what were you going to say, Jonathan?
Well, I think that to both of your points, that's where accountability really comes in. We need some sort of accountability to be enforced, and that's where things like qualified immunity, things like reasonable suspicion, kind of have these kind of gray boundaries, and they get. That's what I mean. We need to look at the legal framework that protects people who
looked at a lot of laws and contracts, though.
Yeah.
There's always going to be gray, man.
For sure.
Always. There's no black and white on anything. It's always gray.
But there is a legal shield that is in place, and that kind of needs to be looked at, and accountability needs to be the deterring factor from doing these terrible things.
I mean, we can't have people out that are policing and putting their lives on the line each and every day and not be protected, from certain instances where you sometimes just don't get it wrong. These individuals are horses of different color. It's really crazy. One of the body cam footage recorded one of the officers from their own body cam saying that they hope they stomp his ASS. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened with Mr. Nichols. The attorney Ben Crump, civil rights attorney Ben Crump, has been assigned to this. Those of you who have watched this program or maybe other programs know that I've had an opportunity to interview Mr. Crump, and we're hoping that we can get him back to the show, get his insights, his thoughts on what's taking place. Our hearts, our thoughts, and our prayers go out to the Nichols family and the loss of their son, to every single parent that is out there that has lost folks, both nationally, locally. We see this happening one too many times. This is another time too many. So we're really praying that we begin to take a real look on how we can have officers of the law that are here meant to protect and serve, but they are not above the law. So we thank you guys for tuning in once again for United Shades of Gray.